to give you an opportunity to think about some of the questions and interact with the material. So good morning, everyone. So Nowza has started the recording. So welcome to this presentation on project management as part of the OPDC Development Corporation's Business Development Program. And I'm Tony Mulvale, part of the Brandon team who are delivering this session on behalf of the OPDC. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Now, so I don't seem to be able to share the presentation with people.
You're saying you can't share the presentation?
No, sorry, I found the buttons. All right, it's all changed in my screen. Oh no, that's the wrong one. There we go, that's best. Right, so welcome everybody. As I said, this is part of the project management session in conjunction with OPDC and the Forge at Park Royal, and this is all about getting ready to bid as part of your preparation activities if you are looking to bid for tenders in local government or within organisations like HS2 and the construction work that's going on there. It's designed to give you insight into how to prepare from a project perspective to be able to deliver on that. So our agenda today is to talk through project management, to talk about how we can go about supporting your bid and the things you need to have in place to do that. I want to talk a little bit about product owners, because when people are talking about agile and agile ways of working, there can sometimes be confusion or lack of clarity around what is a product owner, what is a project, and what does a project manager do. Then we'll go into the project planning, and we'll also have a look at business continuity planning, because that's going to be an important part of your preparation activities. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So a little bit about myself. I'm part of the Brandon team, as I said, delivering this business development program on behalf of the Forge at Park Royal and the OPDC. The Forge is a newly created skills and enterprise hub that's run by Billy Seago, who is the manager there, along with his team, drawn from across the boroughs of Brent, Ealing and Hammersmith and Fulham, in conjunction with the Shore Trust. I am a member of the Association for Project Management, which is the chartered association for the project profession, and I also lecture at the University of West London on their MSc in International Business Management, and I run a consulting module, and I'm responsible for the project management model at that level. So without getting too much into the technicalities, the big question is, what is project management? And this quote from Martin Barnes, who's a former president of the APM, I think summarizes it quite well, to say at its most fundamental, project management is about people getting things done. And that is something to bear in mind. And in case you are wondering, we need to think about that. It's about, what do we need to do, how long do we have to do it, and what are the challenges that we'll face getting there, so our risks and our assumptions that we put into the planning for that. And project management covers a variety of topics. It covers construction and how to build buildings and infrastructure. It looks at public service and procurement, and local authorities and universities roll up under that banner around procurement. There'll be tenders that are put out where you'll need to say, how am I going to manage the project for this? And there's also other pieces around just business projects, where you might have 2 months to get a particular project done. You might not have a very detailed project plan like you would have for construction, but you still need to know what are the milestones you need to meet and what are the tasks you need to do to deliver that project. So when we look at project management and what does it have to offer, it talks about processes, methods, skills, knowledge and experience. And project managers blend that combination of knowledge, that skill, that experience and know-how to get the projects done with projects, we're about delivering specific outcomes for clients, and I'll talk about more in the presentation, where clients, when you're bidding for work, they'll want to know, what are we going to get? So if you attended the bids and tender sessions that were held back in September time, you'll have heard from the presenter there, Neil, saying that we need to know, what are we going to deliver for the client? So it's not just about our business and what we can do, it's about our client and how we can deliver good outcomes for them. Project management looks at constraints around time and cost. So if you only have 8 weeks to deliver something, how do you cut your cloth to fit that period of time available to you? What can you do? What should you not do? How do you make sure that you're managing the risks and issues associated with that activity? And it is different from business as usual. So when you're running the business, you've got an operational process, you've got service engineers on the road, or people manufacturing clothes or food, or people in the hospitality industry who are day to day making sure that guests are checked in, that if somebody's doing an afternoon tea, that they've got the right things being delivered to them. That's an ongoing process, and we do that day in, day out. But projects, we're going to bid for this, we're going to do a particular piece of work to create a new product or a new process, and then the project will be finished, and that will become part of our business as usual activity. And good project managers will have a mix of business and people management skills. And it is interesting when you look at the sort of project management qualifications within the Association for Project Management. They have a foundation, a member, and a practitioner qualification before you get to the chartered qualification. And a good part of the project management skills are about being able to manage business challenges and being able to manage people. The processes, the techniques, and the tools you use to get them are important part of the toolkit, but having those people skills and business skills is a part of that challenge. And when we take those skills and we transfer them into the smaller business world, which is where a lot of you are, a lot of business people are constant planners. They're constantly looking at, how do we do better? What are the things we need to change? How do we improve our processes? And that's all about project planning, because you're going to look at a process and you're going to say, this isn't working as well as we thought, because there are a couple of issues with the way some of the data is being presented. So let's investigate that. What's the challenge? How do we resolve the challenge? What are the steps we need to take to fix it? And then we've got this new and improved process. Or we might be wanting to expand our business, and we're looking at ways of improving that business. Say, okay, so if we're in the roofing business, how do we expand that? How do we expand our sales so that we can attract more clients to our business? And that might be a whole project around developing a marketing plan, developing your search engine optimization, and then running a marketing campaign to expand your footprint. So you will be doing that as a natural thing that you do, and it's a great way to keep your business on track. And then with our business owners as well, we have other things that are going on there. We're monitoring the business, we're managing the accounts, we're managing people, we're looking at procurement, and we're looking at project management. So we keep our businesses going through that. And then when we get to it, to deliver what we need, we're using these project management skills every day. Your business needs to look at logistics, to look at new ways of implementing supply chain integration, to look at customer management. You might have a customer management system that needs replacing, so you're going to look at, well, how do I manage that project to upgrade that solution? Construction processes are another example of that, where you'll be looking at project management skills to say, what happened with this project? How did it work? What was good for us? What do we need to change again? How do we make sure that we get the right people in place on site? And even health and safety can be looked at as a project management activity, where you've got ongoing health and safety, that's part of your business, but you might be looking at plans to say, how do we improve our health and safety? What are the new things that the health and safety executive have released? How do we build that into our business world? So when it comes down to supporting your bid, project management does matter for that, because it gives you those tools and techniques to demonstrate to the client that you have the capacity to do that. And that's important because it puts those structures and processes in place to protect your business. And it's more about making sure that you understand, what am I delivering for the client? How do I keep myself on track? So it's will involve Gantt charts, and it will involve tasks and statuses, but it's also a good way of putting that process in place so that you can communicate with the client and demonstrate that you're organized and you're methodical in the way you work, and that you have a process to manage the interaction between them. So internally, it allows you to understand, what are the risks that we're running, how are we being impacted by changes that the client wants to uh, put to the project or the process or the product that we're talking about. And it also enables us to capture these results and use them in future projects. So if we've done a project for a client and we did this for a local authority, and we've got the data from that previous project, when we come to bid for our next project, and again, this is part from the bids and tenders activity, is you can then say, okay, this is how we did the project last time. This is the data we had, and we can demonstrate that track record of capturing information and reusing it to support future bids. And ultimately, for the client, it's about knowing that you've got those processes in place, so the client has a greater level of certainty that you will be able to deliver the project for them. And they do tend to look at these sorts of things as well, because on the other side of this, if I'm a procurement team, I will have set up my procurement process. I have gone through a set of steps to make sure that I understand what the supplier is going to do, how they're going to work, what they're going to give us, and they're looking at it from a project perspective on their side. So it's about reflecting back to them the language that they're expecting to see, and that's an important part of the bid and tender process. And just as a quick show of hands, and now's where I can't see the chat box, but maybe you can help me out with this, is how many of you use a formal project management approach? You just can pop yes, no, partly into the chat box.
We've got a hand from Christopher John and Cassandra as well. So can you see that, Tony? Can you see the hands?
I can see them. I'm just going to open up the session on my my phone. Okay. So now I can see it on my phone. So yes,
great.
Obi says no, Kate says no, Joe said yes, Jessica said partly, and we've got, yeah, as you said, who was it? Cassandra had a hand up, and John as well, yes, and AS is yes, depending on the project. So yeah, so it's good to have that formal process in there. It is a structured and organized way that really appeals to procurement officers on the other side, because they will have planned out the procurement, they will have gone through the steps in order to do that. And if you're reflecting back to them that you understand how the project management process works, it does create a better result for the bid in terms of the rating that you achieve from that. So that is an important thing to consider as part of that procurement process. And the other topic that we'll go into there is around business benefits as well, because internally you're looking at this project tool to say, is this tender and the project we're going to put in place, does it support our business strategy? So earlier in the sessions, we talked about the business model canvas and your value proposition and the clients that you're looking for. And you need to say, is this part of our business strategy, this particular tender? And that's one of the first questions that you should ask yourself when you're bidding for this, is like, is this part of our strategy? And if it's not part of our strategy, why are we making this bid? And it's not to say that this is, yes, you should do this, no, you shouldn't do this, because it might be that you looked at this and you've gone, yeah, look, this is an interesting opportunity because the product that this client is looking for, we have 50% of that already with what we do, and if we take these steps, we'll get to a product that suits that client. But you're then making a conscious decision to say, we're changing our strategy to fit in to this new market. So sometimes it's about making sure that you understand why you are making the bid as well, even before you go in and start answering all the questions and filling in all the paperwork. You need to say, is this the right thing for us to be bidding for? And so one of the examples I'm going to use now was the one where we had an opportunity to bid for some work with Brandjo in Birmingham, and we looked at this and said, we looked at the bid and said, actually, this isn't the right fit for us. It doesn't quite fit with our strategy. So we've decided that we're not going to bid for that because it's not the right time for us to be doing this. But 6 months later on, you might come back and say, yes, this is the right time. So again, you need to make sure that you're clear about why we're making the bid, because ultimately you want to make sure that the costs of implementing your solution is outweighed by the benefits you're going to be gaining from doing this. And this can be about reputation, it can be about increasing sales, it can be new markets or new products where you take a couple of products you have and create a new niche solution. So always when you're looking at this, is just saying, before we even start the bid process, is this the right bid for us to be involved in? And when we're preparing to bid, there's a number of questions that we have as a client that we want to get through and look at this. And some of these you will have seen in the bids and tenders conversation. What does a client need? What market research did you conduct? And it's always good to have those questions in your bidding process to make sure that you've gone through that methodically to answer those questions as part of the process before you submit your bid. Does it align with your value proposition is a key one, but a couple of questions that people need to consider as well is like, can you afford to win the bid? And is there a clear financial benefit to your company for doing this? They're two things that you need to consider at the board level, but also when you're looking at the risks, what other risks does this present to you? It could be environmental risks, it could be legal, it could be social. So you need to look at those different factors that contribute to this. And always when you're writing this up, you need to make sure that you are talking about how you're going to benefit the client with what comes out. One thing I've added to this in recent months is about ESG policy. So as project managers, we're looking at creating processes to consider environment, sustainability, and governance and environmental policies about water, land, air pollution, those sorts of topics. In sustainability, if we're talking about the circular economy, we're talking about reduce, reuse, recycle. So it's becoming more prevalent now that people asking you to tender for work will want you to talk about those sorts of topics as well in the ESG space, and part of your preparation should include answers around that. So just as a question then, just to pop in the chat, how do people manage their bids? Does anybody have that formal process in place to say these are the steps we're going to go through when we're writing up our project bid and planning for our response to the tender prior to submitting and winning the bid? People want to pop their thoughts in the chat box, that'd be great. Chris says no. Okay. Any other thoughts around that? Oh, he's looking at the market position statement. AO, yes, I have a template and an outline, and we could catch up offline with that as well. So yeah, we could have a look at what that template would look like. Joe bids for things on an ad hoc basis, so smaller projects. So yes, if you're a smaller business, sometimes it's more of a kind of written summary of what you want with some key bullets in there, depending on what the client's looking for. Kate says somewhat we go through some of these points, but more on a case by case basis. Yeah, I think that's a good point as well, Kate, is that we need to be a bit flexible about how we're responding to some of these things, because we don't have to fill in everything all the time. So definitely looking at ways of saying, yeah, we need to do this, this is important. So the size of the bid often dictates the amount of information that you need to include in there. And Cassandra's looking at the value proposition and looking at that aligned based on experience. And yes, we tend to use our judgment a bit as well when we're thinking about should we be bidding for these bidding for these pieces of work. So yeah, it is important that we have an understanding of what are the steps that we're going through, what are the questions that we need to answer, and then our project management processes are going to help us support those answers with the data we need and with the activities that we need to demonstrate that we have them in there. When I look at the project management process, well, oftentimes it is about that business case. It's about, is this the right business for us? And these questions here help to answer that in terms of the steps we take to do that. We will send the slides out from this afterwards as well. So there'll be an opportunity if you want to catch up with me afterwards and talk about this. Happy to do that through email and phone calls. Some of the other things you might want to think about in there as well are all your social policies around modern slavery, human rights, health and safety, social contribution. These are all increasingly important, and I've got the kind of checklist that I can add to that as well. So when we're preparing for a bid, it's like, what do we need? And we have again, just some of these pieces in here around, well, what does your client want and what information do you need to provide? Clients will oftentimes ask for charges or for a sort of pro forma in terms of your cost base. So you need to think about materials and equipment, crew if you're in construction, or perhaps it's people you need for a technology build, depending on the shape of the organization you are and the type of bid that you're making. So who is going to be on your team? Do you need to have somebody to do the project support? Do you need to have somebody who's going to be acting as a kind of consultant or a relationship manager with the client? And if you're looking at building new production lines to do something for your bid, you need to know, well, when do we think this equipment would be ready? What's our lead time between winning the bid and actually being able to start? You need to factor that in as a risk, because the client might turn around and say, well, actually, there's not enough time between winning the bid and getting started. So these are all the sorts of things you need to look at, and how would you mitigate that as a risk? I heard one about Tottenham, who were told that when they were building their new stadium, they wanted to hire the cranes for that, and the lead times were quite long and they were very expensive. And then they looked at buying them, and they bought the cranes because they were cheaper to buy for the build, and then they made a profit on the resale. So sometimes you can look at creative ways like that of getting the equipment you need and then recycling it once the project is done. And always keep an eye on the deadline for the bid. When the bids are when the tenders are put out there, they will have a deadline for them, and this is an activity that might take you 2 or 3 days, depending on your the complexity of the bid, to write up, summarize, edit, and come back and submit a final bid. So you need to keep an eye on those deadlines, and you also need to look at clarifications and questions that come up as well, so that you're able to adjust your plans based on that new information. Just as a question, what other information do you need? Has anybody submitted a bid where they've been asked for additional information that they didn't have to hand at the time? No, says Jessica. I can see Joe is typing. Yes, says Kate. What other information did you need, Kate, when you were doing your piece? Specific specialist tools and services. Yeah, so I look at that as being part of the materials equipment. Is they'll come up with you and say, what is the cost for this, and how do you make sure that you're charging what is considered to be acceptable to the client without undercutting your margins and ending up in the situation where you've priced it incorrectly, and it's can be difficult. Some people might look at it as a loss leader and say we'll get the bid and then we'll win more work as the incumbent. It's always a risky strategy to attempt to do that. Joe's looking at draft documents and default text and quick steps in Word, and that's a good way of doing it, as well as to create yourself a little template in Word that you can just open up and fill in the blanks and then repeat that process again. So it's good to have those tools available to you in Word. When we're looking at our project management as well, it is helping us to capture that evidence. So it's about having structured methodologies and making sure that we're clear about how we are approaching the process. So some companies, when they're asking you to bid for something, they might say, they use a waterfall approach. Some might say they use agile. It depends. Some might even say they don't require a specific methodology. They just want evidence of one. So your project methodology should suit the industry and the way that you're working. As an example, if you're doing house builds, the drawing process can be quite iterative and quite agile, because you'll draw up the blueprint, you'll have a discussion with the client, the shape of the blueprint might change, the materials that are used might change, the structure. If it's a house build and you're building a kitchen, there might be 2 or 3 different designs you go through, but you do all of that iterative work up front to make sure that you've understood what is the client wants, what the materials are, what the colors are, what the bench tops are that they want, and all of that sort of information is gathered in that iterative process, because you want to minimize the rework once you start the build. And then, if you're refurbishing the house, part of that is the kitchen build, then you know exactly what steps you need to take to install the kitchen, because you can't put the bench tops on until you've put the cabinet frames in and you've put all the doors on and you've done a lot of the other work. The bench tops are kind of the last thing you install. So your project methodology isn't necessarily fully agile or fully waterfall. It can be a bit of a mix, as I said with that example, where we've done a lot of iterative agile sort of work to get to the point where we've agreed on what we're going to build, but building work tends to follow a fixed set of steps after that. Technology can be different. It can be fully agile, because you're constantly looking at ways of improving a product, and you might be using Scrum and sprints to get through things. But if you are doing a technology build for a client, it's good to explain how your agile methodology might fit in with a client who's got a waterfall methodology that they're expecting, and that can create clashes as well in your process. But by having a methodology, it means we're focusing on what we need to do and when, and we know what our risks are, and we're taking in that data from other projects. And we can also look at, what does the client use? A lot of local authorities talk about Prince2 and talk about having those processes, and you can map some of your processes onto those Prince2 topics, and you can say we do this way. So we might have a project initiation document, which in Prince2 is a PID, and we can talk about our business case for our startup process as being the PID, so that the client can relate to it in their language. So that's always important, to be able to kind of have that conversation and map that on. And by doing this, we've got those building blocks. This is how we make successful bids for projects using project management. Any questions at this stage, or should I move along? I can see Cassandra is typing. I'll move on to the next slide while I'm waiting for that. And one of the things we often find is that people change their mind. Often when a tender's been put out there, a bid or a tender's been put out there, the client might have come up with a certain specification. If you've won the bid and you're now working on the project, you need to have a way of documenting change, and it is a fairly straightforward process. The client might ask you, or the customer might ask you for information about how you will manage change, and the kind of steps you need to go through is, what is that change? What is the need for it? Why does the client want the change? How are you going to make the change? So it would be an assessment of the client requirement, what you've done, and then how you might make that change. You then need to say, how will we document the change? So typically, if you're on a building site, you'll have a quantity surveyor and you'll have a contract variant, and there's a very formal process between the main and the lead contractors and their subcontractors, and documentation is passed backwards and forwards to confirm we needed to change the door from opening on the left to opening on the right because the light switch is behind the door. So that formal documentation allows people to communicate on a remote site where not everybody can talk to everyone. If you're doing a technology change, you might have a log that you keep that just says client asked for the button on this feature to be in the top right of the screen rather than the middle of the screen, and you might have put that into the way you're managing that using your tools, which could be Jira or could be Monday, depending on the project management tool you have, or Asana. So again, there's ways and means of documenting that, because at the end of that, you'll be asking the question, am I going to get paid for this change, or is this something I have to absorb into the budget because we didn't understand what was needed at the beginning of that process? So these are ways of capturing that information and then talking to the client to say, you're asking us for this change, it's outside the specification that we had agreed up front, so there'll be an additional charge to that. Particularly in the construction industry and infrastructure, that's really important to you, because if you don't get paid for big changes, you can be financially crippled or go bust as a result of that. So making sure that you tell the client this is outside the contract. Yeah, and typically in building works, this is going to be, well, I specified that I would have a granite worktop, and here the client's come back and said, actually, I want a titanium steel bench top, and it's outside of it's a variation of the contract, and it's going to cost an extra £3,000 to do that, but you've already bought the granite and prepared it for them, and now they've made the change, so you want to make sure you get paid for both pieces of work. So it's really important that you have that audit trail there, that you can demonstrate to the client who asked for the change, why was it needed, what you needed to do to make the change, what the cost of it is. Here is the recorded evidence of that, and we've sat down and agreed with the client that we're going to get paid for it. And by going through that in a logical way, it becomes much easier to manage change and keep on top of what is being varied in your contract. And on the flip side of that, it does benefit your client, because you're able to give them high quality outcomes. You can say, this is what you asked for in the original spec. These are all the things we've done to deliver it, and here's the final product you get, and it meets your requirements. So you're getting the right quality in terms of outcome, and also you make sure that their expectations are met. And it is always good to sit down at the end of their contract and have the conversation with the client and say, have we delivered what you asked for? Because you want to avoid surprises, and sometimes clients might have something in the contract that says, we'll keep back 5% of the budget until final delivery, or 10%, or whatever it might be, and you want to make sure you get your extra 5 or 10%, because that for some people can be the margin they make on the project. So it's important that you have that in place, because that then enables you to say, yes, you've met the expectations, so we benefit from that because we're getting the extra revenue. We've now got a case study for future work as well, so we've documented it. We know what we did for this client. We can demonstrate that activity. We build up our reputation for reliability and quality, and what we should have in our contract as well when we sign the contract for the client is that they will provide us with a testimonial, and that we are able to ask for references for the next bid. And that's all part of your project management process as well, is making sure you've got that step-by-step in place to say, right, now we've reached the closure pace, let's talk to the client, let's confirm the work is done, let's get a testimonial. Just as a question for people when they are doing this, how do you get feedback from your clients? Does anybody have a standard approach to that, or is it oftentimes ad hoc and as and when you remember? Sorry, did I cut myself off? Yes, so you can get your feedback as you go along. It's good to have it built into your activity and make it a standard thing for the client, because then it becomes part of what you ask for. You're not basically saying, oh yeah, I forgot to get a testimonial 2 months later. It's always great to get it at the end of the project when it's fresh in the client's mind, and they can do that for you. Clients always give you great verbal feedback, but tricky trying to put them. Sometimes what I'll do, Cassandra, in those ones is, yeah, great, thank you very much for the testimonial. Look, I'll send you an email just to summarize it because I'd like to use it. Send them back the email and said, look, tell me if this is not okay. Otherwise, I'll use it. Try and to sort of put a positive spin on how to get that back. AO has monitoring evaluation sheets to be completed a couple of days before project completion. Yeah. I know, AO, from the conversations we've had, that's particularly important because you need to demonstrate that you've done the work and that you've got the right outcomes for that. And because of the way charitable funding works and things like this, you've got to capture those outcomes and send them back. Cassandra always asks for feedback, but yeah, questionnaires are always good. OB's talking to clients and making sure they're satisfied with the outcome. And Kate, I'm not sure if you heard me, but I said there's a standard feedback form as well. So often it's great to have that and put the feedback form there, get the information from the client and make sure that they've understood, you've understood what they've done, what you've done well, and you can get that as a next stage. Yeah, look, here's one we've done before. And oftentimes recency is important as well, because people want to see recent examples. It's very difficult as a business if you're trying to quote a 6-year-old case study as your success story. You need to have that ongoing demonstration of success. Sandra says, when you ask for feedback, they're not often what they say, so the form works well. Okay, yeah. And when we look at new products, the talked about this at the start about the difference between a product owner and a project manager, and our product owner tends to work with the client. They look at what does a client need, what does it look like. They sit down and clarify the challenges with the client and their teams, and they support their teams through the process. So product manager is more about the client relationship and building up that information about how the client wants to see things, their feedback on the latest piece of work that you've done, and looking at ways to say to the team, this is what you need to do. But they typically are not project managing this. They're not using a formal agile methodology or a waterfall methodology to make that happen. There is usually somebody else who needs to do that. But in a small business, you may be both project manager and product owner, and you kind of need to set yourself out in different ways to make sure that you're not doing too much sort of product development and saying these are all the things we can do and forgetting about the project management piece, because then you end up with a spaghetti of output that doesn't satisfy your team or the client. So it's really important that you think about, well, what's the role I'm playing here? If I'm the product manager, I'm looking at the client and what they want, and if I'm the project manager, I'm looking at how we are getting this done. And in agile and methodologies like Scrum, there are specific roles for those types of activities. And then the product owner is really looking at our roadmap. I tend to talk about roadmaps as being idea pots. People have lots of good ideas about what they want with their product and where they want it to go. But if you map out all of these features into a roadmap and say, this is what we're going to do for the next 2 years, it can suddenly constrain your project. So I like to think that we have a lot of ideas. We can put them to one side and say, look, these are all the ideas we have. It's in a pot of ideas. We can pull them out as we need them. But typically we're looking at sort of 2 or 3 months into the future to say, what would that look like? What's the long-term vision we want? But what are the next 2 or 3 features we're going to deliver, and do it on a more iterative, closely managed basis like this, rather than trying to say we're going to build all of these features in 12 months, 18 months time, because of now, as Nowza would have told you and Nigel would have told you in the business model canvas sessions in June, July, August last year, oftentimes some of the new things you're doing, they're new features we haven't tested in the market. We don't really know if people want them. So we should be considering how do we continue to test the market and fit that into the business development piece, rather than saying to the team, these are all the features you need to do to build, and we're going to build them whether the client have asked for them or not. So it's a better way of managing that. So your focus is on your what I call the market risk management and your stakeholder engagement. So market risk is what I'm talking about, is your product fit for market, rather than I'm going to build this and hope that they'll buy it. And as the product owner, you're also keeping an eye on the scope of the things that your team are building. You don't want them to build too much, but you don't want it to be too little. You want to be just right to get that scope right. So just wanted to compare and contrast what product owners do versus what project managers do, so people are more aligned to that sort of thinking. And as ever, if you want to ask questions or put your thoughts into the chat, please do pop them in and I'll answer them as we go along. It's much better if we've got an interactive session rather than me waiting for you to ask all your questions at the end. And for our product owners, do we have a core skill set? Well, product owners are really about vision, strategy, the psychology, being a leader, working with our clients to make things happen, and having, in the technology space particularly, understanding of can we make this product work? Is it feasible? And what you'll notice here in each of these pieces is, and I mentioned this the previous slide, our strategy is about viability. Is this going to generate revenue for us? This is a revenue stream are going to be down, and that's part of our business model canvas. The relationship management is about desirability and usability. Will people want to use our product? Is there somebody who wants to use it out there? So that, again, we talk about that in the business model canvas with the value proposition and the sort of client facing piece of the business model canvas. Feasibility is, will it work? So that's the other side of the business model canvas. Have we got the right partners? Have we got the right resources? Have we got the right procedures in there that allow us to make this deliver for our client? And in a technology space, if we are building technology, it's the platforms we're using. So our product owners are really more looking at the strategy, the business model canvas, and all of that. But it is an important thing to consider as part of your process. And the question is, does this all look familiar? Well, I've kind of given it away a bit by saying, yes, this is the business model canvas, but there's a lot of overlap and synergies in between managing projects and making sure you're talking to your product owners to get that information from them. So as the project manager, you should be challenging your product owner to say, is this going to work for us? Is this something the client really wants? And if you want to be particularly close to what's going on, oftentimes being in those meetings with the client gives you that insight into how to do that. And I recommend that for project managers, that you sit in on those meetings and you listen to what's going on, because that can then help you to understand how you can get your project done and the different challenges that are being made as well. And it provides a more collaborative approach. And so in our project planning and how it works for the bid planning, I think part of the key piece there is to think about what are the key terms that the client's looking for, because oftentimes we'll be thinking about the procurement process on the other side, and we'll be thinking about, well, what are the keywords they want, and ultimately milestones. These are sort of start dates and end dates are milestones. These are activity points when we're going to have completed key parts of the process. If it is a construction activity based on previous experience, you'll have a good idea of what those milestones will look like, how long it will take you to achieve them, and then be able to put something into a plan that says this is our broad outline and our broad approach to this. always these are subject to change, so we shouldn't be frightened of putting them down and saying these are the things that we can do and this is the order we can do them in, but we need to be conscious of the fact that things can change and that we are subject to the whims of the client or the weather or the environment around us, or even changes in technology can impact us, where a new piece of technology comes out and suddenly the client wants to use that because they see that as being the better way forward. So we need to be aware that milestones are indicative when we're bidding, but when it comes down to starting the project, we need to have a much clearer plan and say to the client, this is what we're going to do. But at least it allows us to put a stake in the ground and say this is the approach. Dependencies, again, procurement people are looking at saying, what do we need to have in place in order to start the work? If you're on a building site, there may be certain pieces that you need to have done on the site before it can be built. That might be obvious if you're putting steels in to, put up the building structure, that you need to have the foundations in place. But sometimes in the technology space particularly, we tend to forget that we need to do the foundation work before we do the next step, and we can be unclear about what we want. So we can say to the client, well, what we need is a clear set of wireframes for your user interface, for the UX experience. So that can be an important thing that we need to pop in there to say, this is what we expect from you. We expect to have had a session with you to say, we understand what the interface looks like. And also it might be that we understand what your processes are, but even before we start, say, what does the interface look like? So assumptions, these are things that we hold to be true about the project. So things we expect to see or not to see when we start. So maybe if we are looking to demolish a building, we would assume that we'll get all of the plans that talk about the building infrastructure, so where the plumbing is, where the wiring is, where the gas mains are, if we have them, that information about the building. But there is a risk that when we go to build to do that project, we don't get those plans. So that then creates a risk for us. So if we don't know where the wiring is, etc., then we have extra risk with that project. So that's those assumptions, we tend to test them out to see, are they true? And if they become true, they can affect our planning, because if we don't have the blueprints, we're not really sure what happens when we knock down a wall or take out a ceiling or dig into the ground. So in those situations where we assume that this is to be true, we might actually raise some clarifications with the client to say, we assume, or do you have the blueprints for the building for us to do the demolition? Because if they don't have those blueprints, then you need to adjust your answers on the back of that. And our risks, these are things that might affect the project timeline in the future. Technology people sometimes overlook the need to have the right infrastructure in place for testing, to make sure that you've got something like GitHub to put all your code into, the developers say that the code is done, and then you can test it, and then it's you, the client, that needs you the project manager, need to say it's ready before you give it to the client for testing. That's a standard practice for doing that, but sometimes developers say, oh, this is ready, and they haven't really tested it. Have you got the infrastructure for storing code, making sure it works, continual builds, continual testing, so that you're not breaking the product as you go along? In the physical world, some of the risks that you have are that you might not have put the plans in place for, as I start again, you might not have those plans, so you don't know where the electrical cables are, so you start digging a hole in the ground and suddenly you turn off all the lights in the building that the people are working in. How do you deal with that? Well, that's a risk, and there's a way of dealing with this, which is to make sure you've inspected the damage, understood what the challenges are, and then have someone come in and repair the damaged cable, which is a fairly straightforward process. But you need to make sure that you've got the right procedures in place and the right mitigating activity in your plan to say, this is how we would deal with that, as an example. And issues, this is the last thing, an issue is something that's gone wrong, and we need a solution to it. Typically, when you're preparing a bid, you won't have any issues, because Nothing's gone wrong yet because it's a hypothetical project at this point. However, when we put our risk log together and say these are the risks, we should also be saying to the client, and this is what we do in the way we manage our issues. We have a process about assessing the issues, capturing them, understanding the challenges, and then discussing them with you, the client, when we need your feedback from them. And part of your bid might be to say, and this is the threshold at which we'll be discussing things with the client. So that's the kind of 5 key things you need to have in your bids when you're talking to people. Is talk about, what are my milestones, what are my dependencies, what are my assumptions, what are my risks, what are my issues. And you should use those words, because on the flip side of this, the procurement professionals will be members of the Association for Project Management. They will be part of SIPS, the Chartered Institute for Procurement, Purchasing and Supply, or other organizations like this. So these are words that resonate with them. It might seem, sometimes natural to you because you're used to dealing with all of these sorts of topics, but putting them into your bid tells the procurement officer on the other side, these are the key things that we're looking at, and it helps generate that resonance and that language that reflects back what they're doing. And then our steps to success, it's about scope. What are we going to do? What are we not going to do? We need to be really clear with the client that there are some things that are inside our scope to do. If we are a blind installer, so we're going to install blinds in a new office building, that's all we do. And we'll say we're going to be installing blinds in building 1, building 2, and building 3, because if the client comes back and says, oh, we'll get buildings 4 and 5, could you install the blinds in there as well? You can say, yes, we can. However, that's going to be extra because it's outside of the contract. So making sure that that scope is clear makes it easier for you as the business to protect yourself from that. And again, in that example, you might have said, we're only going to do buildings 1, 2, and 3, and we are not going to install anything on any other buildings on the site. And that's in writing between you and the client. So then you've got that contract. Your goals, these goals for you, it talks about the outcome of the client and how you're going to get paid in full. So what does that look like? You need to make sure you've documented that. You've got your estimates in there. So that's going to be about your initial quote for the work. How long do you think it will take? How much time do you think you need? How much is it going to cost? And then your plan, you'll lay those steps out and talk about the pieces around there. Say, the approach, what are our goals, what are the gaps and pitfalls we have. And this is a good discipline to do, because we spend a bit of time on this, making sure that we've understood all of those topics. And then delivery, so how are we going to develop this and deliver it to the client? What does delivery look like? Is it, if it's a technology product, is it going to be cloud-based? Is it going to be something in their premises? If it's buildings, or if it's materials, or if it's manufacturing, there are going to be different ways to demonstrate how we have delivered to the client. And then we should be reviewing this. And Joe's already talked about this earlier in the chat today, saying that, she's looking to evaluate changes to her process. So part of it is, every time I do something, what's happened, what worked well, what do I need to do differently next time? So did I get paid in full? If I did, that's great, but why did I do that? And sometimes saying, why did something work well, and understanding that is as important, and understanding why things didn't work. Because if we've found good practice and we want to repeat it, then we can go and do that. Sometimes though, we find that if a project has gone well and we've been paid, it might have been because we did something that a bit of luck was involved. So luck can be a toss of a coin, heads or tails. So we could have delivered something and said it was ready, and because one of our developers had identified a flaw in the process before it was delivered, they fixed it and put it out there. And it might be that the technology infrastructure wasn't quite right, so they had fixed that, and we should take that on into consideration for the next bid we're doing to make sure that we get that right next time. So it's about, using your team and leveraging their experience, but making sure that they feed back into them and say, yep, look, I found that problem just at the last minute, we should have done this next time, this is how we can make it better. Gantt chart, won't go too much into this, but sometimes a procurement officer will like to see a Gantt chart in there that lays out week by week or month by month how you're going to do this. I've just created this one out of Excel, but there are other tools you can use to do that. Jira will produce Gantt charts for you. It's a free tool that I use for this sort of activity. And this is going to be our high level plan. So we should have the key tasks and owners on there. So at least we document to the client, this is what we're going to do, because again, our procurement officers are looking for this sort of information. And if we want to put more detailed tasks in there, who's going to do it? How long will it take? Is it in the right order? Have we found the right dependencies between our tasks? And what's important to think about at this time as well is, how do we measure quality as an outcome? And people talk about having high quality outcomes. Well, that can be then broken down into a series of measurable outcomes. So if we're doing a build, we might say that part of that is our people and their skills, working in height certificates, making sure that they've got the right equipment that's in the right condition to do the job. It could also be the types of materials that we're using. So there's a whole set of tools that's called a Ishikawa diagram that talks about quality, which is kind of a fishbone approach to laying out what are the key factors and what are the attributes that contribute to quality. With our technology front, I look for code that's checked in and has compiled and is unit tested, or has already been sort of automatically tested at the time the code was checked in, to make sure there are no flaws in it. At least that way I know when I go to test the code, it will work. So that's a way of building quality into your process from a technology piece. In manufacturing, this is about spot checks on garments, making sure that you've got the right check-in at the right place for the outcome. And risks. Risks are a challenge, and part of what the procurement teams will be looking for is to say, what could go wrong? What are those risks? So when we talk about our risks, what's going to cause us delays? What might that impact be? How often do we think that's going to happen? What's the likelihood of it happening? And what are our plans that we can put in place to say, these are the steps we can take to do that? And also, what does the client expect? So it lays out a kind of risk management plan that enables you to communicate to the client, this is how we're going to deal with the risks in this project. And the question is, how do people manage this at the moment when you're bidding for this? Do you produce this information, and how do you manage it? Yes, Cassandra. So standard templates, there are building blocks of this, and steps that you can take to do this. And I typically look at it as the sort of working from the top and working down to say, okay, so what's our plan for this? What's the scope? What are the objectives, scope, activities we're going to perform in the plan, and then what are the risks associated with that? So yes, I do have that, and I use it's more of a checklist for me to say, this is what we need to do, and I've got a standard form that I look at for that we can say, this is step by step, this is how you go through it. But it's been built up based on years of experience with doing this, and lots of different ways of putting it together. And for our project plans, we'll have the checklist, and then we'll have the component pieces that put that together. If you work with the Project Management Institute or the APM, they have a very large body of knowledge that they've put together that gives you a full set of checklists and flowcharts and other information like that. So it's quite detailed. Prince2 is another example of a methodology, and experienced project managers will pick and mix from that list to get the right documentation they need for the size of project they're working for. For a 3-week project, I think it's sufficient to have Excel as a spreadsheet, put in there the key topics that you need to cover, who's going to do it and when they're going to do it, and that should be sufficient. But if it's a 6, 12, 18-month project, you're going to have different ways of managing that. You'll need different tools to do that, and the size of the project will count as well in terms of what makes sense to do in terms of the plan, the tools and the techniques that you're going to use. But it should be focused around how you're going to manage that risk and how you're going to make sure that the client is communicated with the delays. Client engagement. We talked about this as our kind of product in our product owner role, but oftentimes when we're dealing with clients, we need to know, what do they want to receive, and this is an example that's more corporate than with a smaller business, but again, it can be modified to fit your need, because ultimately you're saying I've got power, influence, and interest in my project, and particularly when we're dealing with local authorities, government bodies, we need to be really aware of who needs what, when do they need it, and what does it look like, and we can draw up our communication plan from that as well, because some clients just want to have a weekly meeting, some want just an email, so it depends on where we want to sit with this. And in local government, having a formal way, as I said earlier, to connect your internal processes and what you're doing to this client and their expectations with their management process is really important to get that right. So I've popped some examples up here to say, for us sponsors and decision makers, they may have a leadership forum where you can go to do a 10-minute presentation. It might be a board meeting for a local authority where you get a 10-minute slot to come in, present your piece, and then go away. You might be doing weekly updates with your key contact at the local authority to keep them up to date with what's happening. Steering packs and minutes, that's really for a larger corporate if you're doing big projects, construction, that sort of thing. But it's important at the top of all of this to communicate regularly with your stakeholders. A couple of questions here. Anybody able to spot where your supporters might be in this grid? So yes, Cassandra, the methodologies are they are aligned, but you can pick and mix a bit as well, as I said, to just come up with a methodology or a project plan that fits you based on those methodologies. We don't have to fill in all of the templates all of the time. Prince2 was very prescriptive when it first came out in the early 2000s. The later versions of Prince talk about it being more guidelines than rules, so it's more about the theory of project management rather than the absolute step-by-step that you have to do. So just a quick question, if anybody wants to pop this in the chat, where do we think our supporters are in this grid? Hopefully everybody can still hear me. And
sorry, Tony, did you say where do you think our supporters are?
Yeah.
On the grid?
Yeah.
I would assume probably sponsors and decision makers.
Yep, that's the right place. Yeah, they're definitely in that box, but this isn't. But it could be, there can be degrees of it as well. So sometimes what we might find is that there are a couple of supporters, but maybe one is a bit lower down the hierarchy in the organization we're working with. So they might be helpful for us in terms of decision making, but we still need to find, who their manager is, or the more senior person, depending on the organization. There may be a board member responsible for that particular topic that you're dealing with. So you need to find them and say, well, they've got the ultimate power at the top of that. But thanks, AA. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. And the other one I like with this is about your submarines. Now, what I mean by submarines, they're stakeholders who can basically decide they no longer like your project and they'd like to sink it. Anybody have any thoughts about where people might fit into that category? Pop that in the chat, or just open up your mic to chat.
I think again, pretty much what you said before. They're not particularly in any particular place.
Yeah.
One more than the other areas, but you tend to find that in a few areas really. And I don't think they probably do it in the sense of shutting down the project. Is more to get you to think differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I with your sponsors, you are trying to keep them aligned with the project and what's going on. They might want to shut down your project because we've discovered that this isn't the right project to be doing, and that is usually a correct decision. If we reach the point where we think, look, this project is not going to solve the challenge we've set out, we should be able to close the project down and say, here's why it didn't meet the requirement. But yes, with these people who have a lot of power or influence, they can be quite political in their approach, and sometimes they will say, yeah, look, the project sounds great, not really interested in it, it's not really important, but they might send one of their team who's lower down the hierarchy to the meeting just to keep an eye on what's happening. And then all of a sudden you find you get 6 months down the project and this particular person comes up and says, this isn't what we asked for, and because of the influence they have in the organization, they can really disrupt and sink your projects at that point, and it's quite traumatic. So what I talk to people about this is when you're laying out your bid and you're looking at the organization you're bidding with, really do try and find who is in the organization and where do they fit and how do they relate to you and the work you're trying to do. It's maybe not so true for smaller organizations and smaller pieces of work, but if you're bidding for bigger pieces of work, really important to know who can sync your bids. And I then put that into a kind of plan that just lays out who these people are, what we need to do in terms of information that we send them and when we send it to them, and how does that fit into the project management cycle we have. So this is something that we need to do with our clients to make sure that we're constantly in communication with them and that we don't get blindsided by anything that pops up unexpectedly. So a question to ask yourself is, how do you manage this with your clients? And a formal contract closure is getting the stamp that says done, but we need to have a set of steps that we go through to make sure we finish the project, client agrees it's complete, we get the letter that says it's complete, we get our payments, ask them for a reference, and we get the documented evidence. That's the normal process for going through that. And from there, we'll feed back into our lessons learned and say, how do we do this better next time? So what happened? What worked well? How could we improve things? And we want to be objective about this and make sure that we understand these are the facts. This is what happened. We've got all the documented evidence for that. And sometimes we can be a bit busy and go, oh, well, we don't really need to do this. We just push on to the next project. It is really important to take the time to do this, even if it means going off site and spending half a day doing this, because it will help you in the long run deliver better projects. Anybody? Does everybody do this at the end of their projects, or some of you? If you want to pop your answers in the chat or open up your mics to say, is this something you do as part of your project process?
Yeah, we do that as an organization. Yeah, I would say.
And does it help? Do you think with? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like almost like reflecting, isn't it? So it's good to reflect on what went wrong, what went well.
Yeah.
Whatever that went well, it's good to obviously to duplicate it, keep doing it. Yeah. Obviously, there's always areas for improvement. Likewise, you focus on the areas as well, and if it's necessary, then obviously you make improvements where needed for the next project, making it much easier and efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. No, like that makes sense. Thank you. Yep.
Said before as well, if you what was it again? I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, it's always good to reflect on your past project to make the next one better, basically.
Yeah, and that's good feedback, AO, because we can only improve what we understand and have reflected on and looked at what would we do differently next time, and try to prevent repeating the same mistakes. It was a word of advice I had once from one of my project managers. It's fine to make mistakes, just make sure they're new mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was you said before. If a team member were to fill in the same bid, I think we were on the topics of bid. If at the end of the bid, if you came into any errors or problems, that it would be good to feedback to the team so that whoever that's running the project again in the future, that the same problem, they're not freshly coming across it or again because they never learned from the previous time.
Yeah. No, that is good feedback, AO. And again, part of it has been about it's human nature. People make mistakes for all sorts of reasons, and not necessarily because they, it's a deliberate thing. It's because people try things out and they don't work, and that's all part of the natural experimentation. So as a project manager, as a project leader, we need to be open to those situations occurring and saying, okay, so how do we do better next time? And it's about creating that open and transparent communication process so people feel that they can actually say yes. They can say, yes, this is a challenge, this is what happened, and this is what we're doing about it, so that they can make sure that they learn from that experience and that they don't feel that they have to hide away the errors, because once people start hiding things, again, it's really difficult. So we're using this as a way of making sure that we have done well and that we've got areas to improve in. And sometimes we might go, actually, we're never going to do that again, so we're just going to stop doing that as well. And it's fine to say that too. Jessica's going to have a look at this. Obi does it partly. So yeah, so that's good. I've got a few more things. I think one of the things we also need to consider, especially if we are doing construction work or even if we are doing development work, is how do we keep the business going? What do we need to do? And business continuity planning is about taking those steps to say who's going to do what. It shouldn't necessarily be the project manager who's doing this, but we need to have a plan in place. So as a really simple example, two-factor authentication using your telephone is a good way of making sure that your access to the internet systems you're using is secure. Okay, so what happens if you lose your phone? What steps do you need to take that? What's the process that you would go through as a business to say, person's lost their phone, they can no longer access our system today, it's going to take X hours to get it replaced. What is that process? All the way through to buildings being shut down because of gas leaks or electrical faults, those sorts of things. So in your business, you need to know what are our kind of, what could impact our business and who needs to do what as part of that. Do we have emergency contact details? If we're a larger business, we'll need that. What are our emergency plans? This could be you're in a building, you've got on the 10th floor of that building, when the fire alarm goes off, you've got to walk down to the car park and go somewhere. That's part of your emergency plan. But also, it could be what happens if you're using cloud-based software and you lose access to it. What's your process for that? How are you going to recover from that? Where's your data if you need it? And what sort of information do you need to capture as well? So again, information and equipment you need for that, buildings, telephones, technology, that all feeds into your plan. And it may not be something you need for every single bid, but it's something you need as a business that you can then put into your bids. And when we look at this, we look at 4 questions: finances, reputation, schedule, and health and safety. And finance is very simple. Will this cause us to go broke? How's it going to affect our reputation? Will we be penalized for this? And are we compliant with the health and safety law? And these are the sorts of things we need to think about when we're doing our BCP. I did have a little exercise in here just for people to start thinking about factors for your BCP document. These are the sorts of questions I ask. It'd be good if people could take a couple of minutes just to think about those. and put some answers in place. And we're coming up to about just on 12:15. So give you a couple of minutes for that, and then there'll be time for questions and answers after that. Give you another 30 seconds just to finish up an initial thought on that. Okay, Joe, I can see you have popping some questions for Q&A session with regard to bid preparation with health and social care. What is the best process to develop a pricing schedule? What tools, research would you suggest? What should be considered? Okay, OB, thank you for that. We'll cover that in a moment. Anybody got any feedback on their BCP documentation? Any initial thoughts around things they need to do? Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. Risk management particularly impacts personal data. Being a GDPR specialist, I know that data is really important, and being able to protect it, as you are a GDPR specialist, is what I mean. Being able to protect that data and keep it safe and have the right processes in place is important. Proposify. Yep. So Joe's saying, Obi, you could look at Proposify. There's a couple of internet tools that are out there that allow you in the cloud that allow you to put together some of those bids and ask those sorts of questions. Pricing schedules. I think in the health and social care sector, pricing is a real challenge at the moment because of local authority contracts and costs associated with that. And then how do you make sure you've got the right tools and processes in place? I would break it down into thinking about pieces like people, equipment, management tools you need. So like, do you have scheduling software that looks at recording all of your staff, where that, putting them on the rota with all of the qualifications they have, their locations, and then what you can do is when you allocate staff to patients or to the care receivers, then you can optimize the journey time for those for the care staff as well, to make sure that they aren't spending too long traveling between addresses if you're doing home-based care. So there's a few things you can talk about there as well. Obi, is your business in Brent, Hammersmith, or Ealing? Reason why I asked the question is as part of the program we're running here, the OPDC offers 3 hours of free one-to-one support to businesses as well. So if you are a business based in Brent, Ealing, or Hammersmith and Fulham, and you haven't already taken advantage of the free one-to-one service, then you should contact myself or Nowser afterwards, and we can put you in touch with one of the Brandon team who can provide you with that service. No cost to you, but it is something that we can do for you as part of the program, and it's all sponsored by HS2 and Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation.
Thank you, Tony. I am in contact with Nelza.
Perfect. Yeah.
But I would like more information if there's any more information. Thank you.
Yeah, just email Nelza and myself afterwards, and we'll get one of our advisors to talk to you.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Obi.
Cheers.
Okay. Anybody got any other questions at the moment? Any thoughts on business continuity? This is just a starter. There are documents you can download from the web as well that talk about business impact assessment and business continuity plans. For certain businesses, you do need to demonstrate that you have these this information in place. It's really important because oftentimes the contract, the clients are looking for information that says, if you can't do the work, how are you going to get yourself sorted out? What will you need to do in order to be able to continue to provide the service? And in the healthcare space, for example, OB, it is important that your staff turn up every day to see your care receivers. So how do you make sure that if, for example, there was a flood and your office was shut, how can you demonstrate that people can continue to provide the service even though you can't make it into your building? And that could be very simple. We're all cloud-based software. We all work from home. We've got the right procedures in place. We've got contact numbers. But again, it's just about making sure you've documented that and that people know what it looks like. It doesn't have to be, as I said, it doesn't have to be a long document with lots and lots of information in there. It just has to cover those basics. Any other questions at the moment? Any other feedback? We can go to sort of open questions and answers at the moment if you want. Just as a reminder, we're doing a couple more of these sessions in February and March. We have Joe, who's been on the call today, be talking about GDPR for SMEs. It's an increasingly important topic, one with the exit of the UK from the EU, but also just with the increasing need for all businesses to be GDPR compliant. And in March, we'll be doing the social media for business webinar with Nicola Ryle from Branduin. So both really good sessions for you to come along and attend as part of our program. And here, that's the end of the prepared material, but we've got a few minutes, so I'm happy for you to raise questions. If you could put your feedback about the session in the chat, that would be appreciated as well. Testimonials are important, and it'd be good if you could just pop in there any thoughts, feedback about the session. Did you enjoy it? Did you find it useful, etc.? That would be really appreciated as well. Anybody have any questions at this point? The other thing I'll send out when I send this is I've got a couple of links to some of the portals that you can use for bidding for services as well. So that'll be included in the presentation. And I'll just stop sharing my screen at this point. We've got
approximately 5 minutes left. So if anybody's got any questions, please unmute yourself, put your cameras on, and feel free to participate.
Thanks, Nelson.
Thank you, Tony, for an excellent session. That was very helpful, very useful again. And we'll be sending you, we've got a new YouTube channel. We're going to be uploading this recording on our new channel, and we'll be sending out links by the end of this week, early next week, along with the next webinar registrations. Joe, if you're there, I'm still waiting for you for information for your session. Useful to have it soon, so we can make sure your session is absolutely full as well. Thank you.
So yes, I'll pop my my email in the chat box as well. So if you want to ask me further questions, you can contact me via tony@branduin.co.uk. Jessica says lots of things to think about. Okay. Thanks, Jessica. Been a very, very informative session. So yeah, I saw your comment there. Thank you for that. Thanks, Kate, as well for your feedback. Yes, Kate, we'll send out. I've got a couple of documents I can send to you as well. So if you email me via Tonium@Brandon, I'm happy to send you out a couple of those things just to give you example templates. And as I said, we do enjoy questions and answers. So if you've got questions that are specific from this that you would like to ask, please do ask them. If you would like to leave some feedback as well, that is always appreciated. Yep, Cassandra, I will send I'll send a couple of things to you as well. Maybe we can have a quick phone call to catch up on that.
Okay, Tony, if you want to close the session, I guess I'll stop the recording as well.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nauza. It's just on 12:30. But look, just before we go, once again, I'd like to thank you for coming along. It's been a great session. It's been really good to be able to talk to this, and I enjoyed the interaction and feedback. As at the start, this is all part of the Brandon program that we're delivering on behalf of the OPDC and HS2 for businesses based in Brent, Ealing, Hammersmith and Fulham. So if you are in one of those boroughs, you are eligible for the free one-to-one support. But thank you very much for coming along today. It's been great to have you here, and we look forward to seeing you at our next seminar next month, where Joe Brianti is going to be talking about GDPR. It is really important for SMEs. It's becoming much more of a challenge for us to be compliant with the Information Commissioner's office and the rules. Lots have changed recently, so do come along to that because it will be a very informative session. So thanks very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day. If anybody else wants to stay on and ask a couple more questions, I'm happy to hang around for another few minutes.